There are moments in history when the most devastating thing a person can do is nothing at all. No speech, no confrontation, no dramatic declaration, just a presence so deliberate, so composed, and so unapologetic that it says more than any words ever could. On the 13th of June, 2026, Prince William, the Prince of Wales and the future King of England, stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace in front of millions of people watching around the world. And with nothing more than his calm, commanding presence, he delivered what many are calling the most powerful message in recent royal history. Not a single word about his brother Harry, not a single glance toward California. And yet, everyone who was watching understood exactly what was being said. This is the story of that moment. But to understand what happened on that balcony, you have to understand everything that led up to it, because what we witnessed at Trooping the Color 2026 was not a single event. It was the culmination of years of tension, betrayal, public humiliation, and a silent war that has been building inside the House of Windsor ever since the day Harry and Meghan walked away from royal life and decided they would tell the world their version of the story. Let's go back to where this really began. In January of 2020, the world woke up to news that shook the British monarchy to its core. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced that they were stepping back from their roles as senior members of the royal family. They would no longer carry out official duties on behalf of the crown. They would instead seek financial independence and split their time between the United Kingdom and North America. The statement they released was not coordinated with the palace. It was not agreed upon in advance. The Queen, King Charles, who was then the Prince of Wales, and William himself reportedly found out when the rest of the world did. That moment alone planted a seed of damage that has never fully healed. What followed was a period of rapid and escalating tensions. Harry and Meghan relocated to California. They sat down with Oprah Winfrey and gave an interview that stunned not just the royal family, but the entire globe. Allegations of racism within the palace walls, claims about mental health being ignored, suggestions that members of the family had expressed concern about the skin color of their unborn child. It was explosive. For William, a man who had spent his entire life being trained to never show emotion in public, to never crack under pressure, to never give the press what they are looking for, it was a deeply personal attack wrapped inside a media spectacle. And it landed on him differently than it landed on anyone else, because the person making those accusations was his little brother, the boy he had grown up with, the boy who had stood by his side at their mother's funeral when they were just 15 and 12 years old, the person who, for a long time, had been not just his brother, but one of his closest allies. Then came the Netflix documentary. Then came Spare, the memoir that Harry published in early 2023. And with each new chapter in the Sussex public relations campaign, the details became more personal, more pointed, and more damaging. Harry described a physical altercation with William. He talked about a confrontation that left him shaken. He described William as someone capable of losing his temper in a way that frightened him. He put into print things that the royal family considers absolutely sacred. The private conversations, the family arguments, the moments behind closed doors that are never supposed to reach the outside world. For the institution of the monarchy, this was a crisis. For William personally, it was something he could not forgive easily. Sources close to the Prince of Wales made clear, very quietly, that William was done. That a line had been crossed. That while he would always acknowledge Harry as his brother, the relationship as it had once existed was fundamentally broken. And here is where William's strategy becomes something remarkable to observe. Because most people in his position would have responded, they would have fought back. They would have given briefings to sympathetic journalists or released carefully worded statements that acknowledged the hurt without saying too much. But William did something far more powerful. He went quiet. He focused entirely on his work, on his family, on his vision for what the monarchy should look like in the 21st century. He and Catherine launched the Earthshot Prize and took it global. He championed causes around mental health, homelessness, and environmental sustainability. He became, quietly and methodically, exactly the kind of Prince of Wales that Britain needed. And in doing so, he made the contrast with his brother impossible to ignore. While Harry and Meghan were giving interviews, releasing documentaries, writing books, and appearing on talk shows to talk about how much they had suffered, William was doing the job. While they were crafting their brand around victimhood and grievance, he was rolling up his sleeves and getting on with it. The British public noticed. The approval ratings reflected it, and the gap between how the country viewed William and Catherine on one side and Harry and Meghan on the other grew wider with each passing month. By the time 2026 arrived, the dynamics had shifted in ways that few people could have predicted back in 2020. Harry and Meghan, who had seemed so powerful and so untouchable when they walked away from the royal family, were in a very different position. Their Netflix deal, once celebrated as a landmark moment for the Sussexes, had reportedly come to an end. The streaming's giant had taken everything they were willing to give: the documentary, the personal stories, the carefully curated footage of their life in California, and the returns had diminished. Meghan's television projects had not landed the way she had hoped. Her lifestyle brand, American Riviera Orchard, had launched with considerable fanfare, but the conversation around it faded faster than expected. Her popularity in the United States, the country she had chosen as her home and her platform, was measurably declining. Polls showed that Americans, who had initially been sympathetic to her story of being driven out of a racist and cold royal institution, were growing tired of the narrative. The sympathy had a shelf life, and it was running out. Meanwhile, something was shifting around Harry, too. There were signs, subtle but unmistakable, that he was not entirely at peace with the life he had chosen. Reports emerged that he was in contact with King Charles, that a private meeting had taken place at Clarence House, that despite everything, despite Spare, despite the Oprah interview, despite all of it, Harry still wanted a relationship with his father. He was said to be hoping that Charles would play a visible role in the 2027 Invictus Games, the annual sporting event for wounded veterans that Harry had founded, and that remains one of the genuine achievements of his post-royal life. It was described as his dream to have his father standing beside him at those games. And for Charles, who has always been characterized as a man who finds family conflict physically distressing, there was reportedly a genuine desire to find some kind of peace. But then came the part that changed everything for William. Because it emerged, through sources speaking to royal commentators, that Charles was not just emotionally open to reconnecting with Harry. He was allegedly going further than that. Reports surfaced suggesting that the king had been helping to cover the costs associated with Harry and Meghan's planned trip to the United Kingdom. Security, expenses, accommodation at a royal residence, the kind of support that, in normal circumstances, would have been unremarkable. But these were not normal circumstances. Harry and Meghan had left. They had given up their publicly funded security protection when they stepped back from royal duties in 2020. Harry had fought that decision in court, arguing that his family was in danger without it, but the decision had stood. For Charles to now quietly step in and help finance the arrangements for a Sussex return without apparently telling William about it in advance. That, according to multiple sources, is what broke something inside the Prince of Wales. Royal expert Tom Sykes, speaking on the Royalist podcast, described William's reaction in terms that left very little room for ambiguity. William was furious, not the kind of contained, managed frustration that a man trained from birth to keep his emotions in check learns to express carefully. Genuinely furious. The word being used by sources around him and reported across multiple major outlets was that William felt his father had betrayed him. That by secretly helping Harry and Meghan return, by funding their visit, by potentially giving them access to royal accommodation without consulting the rest of the family, Charles had undermined everything William stood for. He had sent a signal that the Sussex departure, with all its public attacks and revelations and damage to the institution, was ultimately forgivable. And for William, who had borne the brunt of Harry's most personal accusations, and who had rebuilt his public standing on the foundation of duty, loyalty, and service, that was not something he was willing to simply absorb in silence. The consequences of this fury became apparent almost immediately after Trooping the Colour. It has been reported that William refused to attend the customary family lunch that traditionally follows the celebration. This is not a small thing. Trooping the Colour is the most important ceremonial event in the royal calendar outside of a coronation or a state funeral. The family lunch that follows is a tradition. It is the kind of thing that senior royals attend not necessarily because they want to, but because it is part of the fabric of the institution. For William to walk away from it, to take Catherine and his 3 children and leave as soon as the official program concluded, was a deliberate act, a statement made without a press release, a signal sent to his father that his patience had a limit, and that limit had been reached. And there is more. Sources have also indicated that William has threatened to boycott the Sandringham family gathering, another cornerstone of the royal year. For a man who has built his public identity on responsibility and continuity, threatening to absent himself from family occasions is not something done lightly. It speaks to the depth of his anger and the seriousness with which he views what he sees as a fundamental breach of trust between himself and his father. Now layer onto all of this what happened at Trooping the Colour itself, what millions of people around the world watched that day, and what has since been described, in the language of tabloid headlines but with a kernel of genuine truth, as William burying Harry and Meghan without saying a word. The pageant of Trooping the Colour has been a feature of British royal life for over 260 years. It marks the official birthday of the sovereign. It is one of those events that functions as a living argument for the continued existence of the monarchy, a spectacle of military precision, of tradition maintained, of an institution that endures. More than 1,000 soldiers, 200 horses, 400 musicians, the streets around Buckingham Palace and the Mall packed with crowds waving flags, carriages carrying members of the royal family, the king inspecting the troops, and at the end of it, that balcony appearance, the moment the cameras have always loved most, the moment where the royal family presents itself to the world and the RAF performs its flypast overhead. William was there. Catherine was there, radiant and composed in a way that reminded the world why she's become one of the most admired women in public life. Their children were there, George, Charlotte, and Louis, the next generation of the Windsor dynasty, growing up in front of the nation's eyes and carrying with them the future of an institution that is nearly 1,000 years old. The king was there, the working royals who carry out duties on behalf of the crown, week in and week out, year after year, were there. Harry and Meghan were not there. And under the rules that Buckingham Palace has maintained consistently since they stepped back from royal duties, they could not be there. Because the balcony, that most powerful of platforms, that most visible of statements about who is part of the working royal family and who is not, the balcony is reserved exclusively for those who do the job, who show up, who carry out the engagements and the tours and the patronages and the quiet, relentless work of representing the crown in the world. You do not get to appear on that balcony because of who you were born as. You appear on it because of what you do and the commitments you have made and kept. This is the rule that William did not need to announce. He did not need to make a speech about it. He did not need to reference Harry at all. The rule was already there, established and maintained, and all William had to do was stand on that balcony with his family and his future and let the image speak for itself. 4 million people watching around the world. Some estimates suggest the viewing figures for royal events of this scale reach even higher when you count international audiences. Saw that image. They saw the Prince of Wales looking every inch the man who will one day be king. They saw his wife beside him, the future queen, a woman who has navigated years of intense public scrutiny and personal illness, with a dignity that has only deepened the affection in which she is held. They saw his children, happy and waving and utterly at ease in a moment that most human beings will never experience. And they understood, without anyone needing to say it, that the family on that balcony was the royal family, and the family in California was something else entirely. There was another layer to the tension in the days surrounding this event, one that has caused particular anger in William's camp, and speaks to just how fundamentally different his values are from those his brother now appears to operate by. Reports emerged that Harry and Meghan may have been considering bringing cameras with them on their upcoming UK visit, not for a formal documentary necessarily, but potentially. Filming footage that could at some point be shaped into content for Netflix or some other platform. The idea that they would return to British soil, potentially stay in a royal residence, potentially interact with members of the royal family, and film it for commercial purposes, was described by sources close to William as a personal attack. He and Catherine were said to be taken aback by the suggestion, having received no advance warning. Kensington Palace chose not to comment publicly, which is entirely in keeping with its approach of never engaging directly with Sussex media activity. But the message from William's side was clear, even without a formal statement. This was not acceptable. What makes William's position particularly interesting to examine is the contrast between how he and Harry have each chosen to handle the collapse of their relationship. Harry went public. He went global. He turned his pain and his grievances into content, into an Oprah interview, into a Netflix series, into a #1 best-selling book. He told the world what had been done to him and who had done it. And in the short term, it worked. People listened. The audiences were enormous. The book sold in extraordinary numbers. But here is what Harry perhaps did not fully anticipate. Once you have said everything in public, once you have aired everything, once you have given the world every detail of your private pain, you have nothing left to reveal. The story exhausts itself. The audience moves on. And you are left with whatever relationship you still have with the institution you left, and with the brother you named and detailed and described in print. William, by contrast, said nothing. He absorbed the accusations. He let the publicity cycle run its course. He allowed Harry's narrative to exist in the public space without fighting it directly, because he understood something that Harry perhaps did not. The institution of the monarchy does not win arguments by having them. It wins by continuing, by persisting, by showing up day after day to do the work that justifies its existence. And as Harry's story grew older and Meghan's projects struggled to find traction and their relevance in American celebrity culture began to fade, William simply kept working, kept showing up, kept being the Prince of Wales. The result is a situation where, in the summer of 2026, the balance of power and perception has shifted dramatically from where it stood when Harry and Meghan made their exit. The Sussexes are now, by multiple accounts, actively seeking a return to some form of proximity to the royal family, not as working royals. That ship has sailed and nobody is seriously suggesting it comes back, but as something, as family perhaps, as participants in the Invictus Games story, as parents who want their children, Archie and Lilibet, to know their grandfather before it is too late. There is a genuine human dimension to this that deserves acknowledgement, because beneath all the media strategy and the PR maneuvering and the competing narratives, there are real people involved. A father with cancer who wants to see his grandchildren. A son who, whatever his public statements have been, reportedly regrets some of what he said. Children who are growing up in California with no meaningful connection to the country and the family that form half of who they are. But the politics of the situation are complicated by everything that has come before. And at the center of those politics stands William, who is not simply Harry's brother, but also the future sovereign. His relationship with his brother is not just a personal matter. It has implications for the institution he will one day lead. And from where William stands, every decision his father makes about Harry and Meghan carries a message about what the monarchy will tolerate and what it will not. If Charles secretly funds Harry's UK visit, what signal does that send? If the Sussex cameras are allowed to follow them through royal spaces, what precedent does that set? If Harry is welcomed back warmly without any public acknowledgement of the damage his disclosures caused, to William personally, to Catherine personally, to the Crown, then what does that say to every member of the royal family about the consequences of betraying the institution? These are the calculations William is making, and they explain why his response to all of this has been the one it has been. Not confrontation, not public argument, just a very deliberate, very visible demonstration of who is doing the work, who is honoring the commitment, and who belongs on the balcony. There is one more thing worth saying, and it concerns Catherine, because in discussions of the William and Harry rift, the role of the Princess of Wales is sometimes under-examined. But Catherine is not a passive figure in this story. She is one of the most effective members of the royal family, arguably the most strategically impactful, and she has lived through attacks from the Sussex camp that were deeply personal. Meghan's comments in the Oprah interview, including suggestions about a disagreement over bridesmaid dresses that reportedly moved Catherine to tears, were widely seen as unfair and hurtful by many who have worked with and around the Princess of Wales. Catherine has never responded to them directly. She has never given an interview about the rift. She has never fed briefings to the press about how she was affected. She has, like William, simply continued to do her job, and she has done it with such consistency and grace that her standing with the British public has never been higher. When Catherine stood on that balcony at Trooping the Colour in 2026, she was not just standing there as William's wife. She was standing there as a woman who has earned her place in the royal family through years of service, through a serious illness faced with extraordinary public dignity, and through an approach to royal life that reflects everything the institution is supposed to represent. Her presence beside William was its own statement. The two of them together, with their children between them, represented something that no amount of Netflix content or published memoir can manufacture. They represented continuity. They represented commitment. They represented the future. And Harry and Meghan, watching from wherever they were in California, would have known it. Because for all the talk of liberation and authenticity and living life on their own terms, there is something about that balcony that no amount of celebrity branding can replicate. It is the visual embodiment of belonging to something ancient and consequential. And the fact that it is now closed to them, not out of cruelty, but as a natural consequence of the choices they made, is perhaps the sharpest edge of the entire situation. The headlines will continue. There will be more reports about Harry's planned return in July, more speculation about whether he will meet William, more analysis of every photograph and every statement and every carefully worded denial. The cameras that may or may not accompany the Sussexes on their UK trip will either appear or they will not. Charles will either play a role at the 2027 Invictus Games or he will not. William will either attend Sandringham or he will make good on his reported threat to stay away. The story is not finished. But the image from June the 13th, 2026 has already been written into the record. A Prince of Wales standing tall on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, his family around him, the crowd below him, the future ahead of him. A man who has chosen, consistently and without drama, to let his actions do his speaking. A man who understood, perhaps better than anyone else involved in this long and complicated family rupture, that silence is not weakness. That the most powerful statement you can make is sometimes simply being exactly where you are supposed to be. William did not say a single word about Harry or Meghan that day. He did not need to. 4 million people saw the balcony. 4 million people understood. And in the particular language of the British monarchy, where what is not said is always as important as what is, that was everything.